I say to myself, I shouldn't go for what I know. I have spent an hour and 15 minutes on the first 20 moves of this game. I am currently undefeated for 4 games in a row, and here I'm playing the white pieces, and my opponent immediately goes with the Sicilian defense. 2100 from Germany, who's also 25 years old. I go knight f3, and now we go into a Najdorf Sicilian for the second time in 3 rounds. At this moment, I knew that my opponent exclusively played the Najdorf. I hopped into a line that I have only played once else, a few months back in Cambridge, England. In that tournament, I tried this move, rook g1. This is known as the freak attack. I played like a freak. That was the title of the video, if you remember. And my idea was to push g4, g5. And this is a very well-known thing. Even Magnus has played it more than a few times. To my opponent's non-surprise, to my surprise that my opponent wasn't surprised, he went e5 immediately and now h5. And after these 2 consecutive moves, I kind of panicked. He actually ended up telling me after the game that he had not on a DGT board this exact variation, the freak attack two games earlier. I didn't have access to it, I didn't know that he had this, and so he was very well prepared in this game. So I go with h3 from my memory. This is a fine move. The idea is that you're taking away the g4 square from these 2 pieces, and because black played h5 here, white's plan is not really to escalate g4 anymore, but instead go for a quick castle like this and then play f4. And because the bishop is on e3 and the pawn is on h3 taking up g4, there's no knight g4 hindering the bishop. So that's what I go for. My opponent plays this so fast, I say to myself, I shouldn't go for what I know, what I like literally rehearsed before the round. So I don't go for queen d2, and I just off a whim go with queen f3. Knowingly, this is not the best move that I studied, but I went with this anyways to kind of, I wanted to get my opponent out of his comfort zone. So my opponent went with rook c8, and now I was thinking of castles, but my play here on the king side is not convincing in my opinion, and my opponent was just getting in with knight b6, c4. I got really scared, and I played another dubious move, rook d1. b5. b5 is a fine move in my opinion. I go a3 and now queen c7. This is like 5 not great moves from both me and my opponent consecutively, which is kind of crazy. And now I find myself playing bishop d3, and I already spent 40 minutes on the clock in 13 moves. But that's not it so far. You'll see it gets even crazier. Knight b6. And here, I was thinking about g4. This is what I was spending time on, by the way. Like, I have to have an explanation for my time that I consumed. But finally, I break down and play it. After bishop d3, knight b6, g4 is now in, h takes, there's still like rook h4. That's very scary in my opinion. My opponent didn't go for this at all. I was just so sure rook h4 was coming in. On knight c4, I have choices, but I didn't like taking. Taking just gives the bishop pair just thematically incorrect. But it's the best move at the end of the day. And although white has to assume a ugly position, it is ugly and it is small edge for the black pieces. It is what it is really, like queen b7 attacking b2 and now rook b1. And white just is playing passively and has to like take the punches, which I didn't like obviously, and I went for like this stupid looking move, bishop c1. I'm saying stupid and being harsh on myself because I played a move here knowing that my opponent would win a pawn. I knew this gave knight takes a3 and I still chose it over bishop takes c4. I hope this speaks to how much I hated bishop takes c4, by the way. So knight takes a3, I know that I can't take because of queen takes c3. I go g5, attacking this knight, and now the knight goes back to d7. This is my opponent's first mistake in a long while, actually. My opponent has been playing very fine moves. I go with g6, now attacking this pawn, overloading, you could say, this pawn, and nearing somewhat of an attack. My opponent patiently goes back with the knight, to which I go bishop g5, now attacking this knight. The only good move to hold more than a small edge is rook h3, which is a very active looking move and looking very nice. My opponent played the second best move, bishop e7, and now I went for g takes f7. But I must say that the engine finds equality here after an insane line. Knight d5. which I looked at only for 2 seconds. It basically consciously gives a pawn here with check. I mean, talk about craziness. Obviously, if bishop takes, the queen saves itself from c7 and takes on c2, and I'm down 2 pawns, but the engine comes up with king d2 here, which is not obvious, to say the least. The king is out in the open, and the reason why this is so genius is that after bishop takes d5, e takes, and let's say the knight saves itself with knight b4, here white is winning with the rook c1. And you're attacking the queen. This is kind of like a skewer, the queen moves, and now knight a5, and suddenly this becomes very dangerous. If the queen moves to b8, by the way, I take on f7, and then go bishop g6 check. If the king takes, I take with discovered check, and I'm winning a ton of material, probably g7, so this is over. And if the king goes back, let's say king g8, the silent move queen f5 is threatening mate in 2, and it's lights out. So none of this happened. I took on f7, king takes, and now knight d5 was the best move. Might I remind you here, if you haven't realized it yourself, because I haven't talked about it, but we're 20 moves into this game, and I have 14 minutes on my clock. I have spent an hour and 15 minutes on the first 20 moves of this game. This is the worst time management I think I have ever had in this game, which is a statement. Rook a1 is played here with 13 minutes on the clock. An obvious, interesting move that I was pretty much exclusively thinking of knight c4. And here I was ready to play like knight d5. But yeah, it just gives b4. And the problem here is that if I take, b takes is a little too sweet, because now bishop takes and then c2 comes in, and it's really, really scary. So after rook a1, my opponent goes with b4, and I take, and this actually happens, and I go bishop takes a6. And suddenly, after rook b8, which is a mistake, queen b6 was a little better, but suddenly after rook b8, I decide for myself that the pressure surmounting on b3 is too much, and I only have one move. I convinced myself I only have one move. Best was to give a pawn, like literally admitting to giving a pawn with this. I went with knight c1 here. And after queen b6, my heart drops. Now, I'm already down on time, so I'm playing this extremely fast, these last 3 moves. But here, it's completely over. Like queen b2, my rook is getting trapped, my bishop is hit, so I have to move my bishop first. And I don't have many moves. I find the best one, which is queen e2. Best one, it's -3. I'm down the equivalent of a piece here. And after queen b2, my idea with this queen e2 move is that I'm just, well, I'm playing rook a2. And after you takes, at least you can't take the full rook, because then I have bishop c4. In fact, I was going to surrender to this because I had seen that bishop c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, king here, queen check, king here, there's no moves, and I just lose a rook. That's what I had seen. But here, you can just take my rook. So this was a bad assessment. Anyways, my opponent, also down on time now, well, 20 minutes left. My opponent goes queen d4, and I'm like, what? Like, outrageous. And he told me after the game he saw queen b2 and wasn't convinced enough because of this rook a2 thing. But I was like, it's completely winning. But then he told me, I just wanted to crush you positionally with queen d4. This is just missing a tactic, in my opinion, even though he didn't miss it. That's the crazy part. I went with bishop d3, defending this pawn, and now queen a4. And here I'm like celebrating, even though I know I'm not anywhere near winning, but I'm celebrating like the fact that I didn't lose 3 moves ago. So I play f4. Like now I'm like hunting. Like I'm saying to myself, the game is mine. And this is an obvious mistake. I mean, this is just so weak after all. But after takes, and now rook h4, I can still defend. Like, it's playable. I'm playing this. The best move is knight g4 here, which is very obvious now that we see it. But at the time, it wasn't obvious. I have 4 minutes left. My opponent has 6 minutes. Queen d4 is played attacking. I just have bishop e3. My opponent missed this. Queen e5. And now I play bishop f2. It's a blunder. But queen f2, and just for the record, I'm holding here. But bishop f2, complete blunder. And I saw it right after I played the move. I saw it before I played the move, thought it was okay, still played the move. Second time I do this mistake in the game. Knight takes e4. Bishop takes, and it's over, effectively. Like, if king f1, Queen f2 is made in 2 moves. I have to give my queen to checkmate. And if king d1, this is where I thought I was okay, by the way. Knight f2. How did I think this was okay? This is absolutely, it's over. Oh, and the beauty of knight takes e4 is that if I take here, the rook saves itself and pins my queen to my king. So I have to play like rook f1 here, hope for the best. My opponent, down on time, plays rook h2, which I saw, and look at the confidence here. I have 1 minute 18 on my clock. I play queen f3, immediate. I gain like 25 seconds on my clock. I literally played this in 5 seconds, increment of 25 seconds kicked in, and the idea of this is just that I'm getting out of the pin. Rook h3, and now I play rook g3. Like instant, I gained a minute on my clock. We're gaining energy, and for the first time of the game, I have more time than my opponent. Insanity. Rook takes is played, another mistake. Supporting the rook with rook bh8 to then further suppress my king is the best continuation, but this is not obvious. I'm giving credit to my opponent. So anyways, he decides to trade, and now I go queen takes g3, which is a bad move, again. Bishop takes was better. I didn't want this because I didn't like this move, I think. But apparently here, knight e2. Oh, yeah, I missed this on time pressure. So queen takes is bad because of rook h8, and this is over, apparently. If queen g2, now there's queen f4. Wow. Insanity. And if takes, rook h1 check, king up, and now bishop g4 check. It's hard to spot this. Let's give credit. My king is in a mating net now, and this is coming in. Wow. Anyways, my opponent is human, played queen h5, and now I go knight e2, just like bringing my knight into the game after like a 10-move hiatus. Rook c1, rook c8, another mistake. Like my opponent, like I feel like I kind of carried move 10 to 20 with like a ton of mistakes, and now my opponent carried move 20 to 30 with a ton of mistakes. I go knight f4, attacking this queen, and now I have like some gears in motion, big motion by the white pieces. Queen h1, and I'm about to play queen g1 when suddenly I think of this crazy move. See if you can find it for 2 seconds. This move is kind of crazy, king h2, like sacking a rook. And I was looking at this for the remainder of my time because we're near 40 moves, which is where we get 30 minutes plus. Here I had check, which wins this exchange back, so king back, and now takes. But now after bishop f8, I found nothing, and this is a correct assessment. White has absolutely nothing here. Knight g5 leads to a draw. After queen here, bishop check, sacking a bishop, and then this regains the exchange. And this is equal, but I think like white actually has a small edge here, practically speaking, even though this is a draw by the engine. I played queen g1, we trade into an endgame, and after bishop g4, there comes a really important moment in the game. a4, g5, knight back, and now d5, and now I gain my 30 minutes. So I have an increment, like I gained 30 minutes at move 40, and I gained it here, and here I have 30 minutes and 33 seconds. I took a 10-minute turn out of the frying pan right back into the fire. I took a 10-minute turn because here it is, I feel like I have an advantage, like practically like even objectively speaking. I feel like I have an advantage. I feel like I have an outside pass pawn that's just going to queen, and I feel like it's so strong. But at the same time, the pressure on this e4 pawn is a huge distraction. And I was looking for 10 minutes at e takes d5, e5, even a5, things like bishop a6, and throughout all my conclusions, I couldn't find anything good. However, there's a certain thing in chess called the engine, which is the closest thing that we have to God and us chess players. And d5 is met with a5, actually. I looked at this move during the game, but I didn't find the key idea. After takes, this does sacrifice a pawn, but this legendary bishop h6, which I did see, attacks the rook to then try to get bishop b7 and try to queen this pawn. You see, here we own this square on a7, but we don't own this square on a8, and that's what makes this passed pawn work. So if you have a bishop on b7 controlling the 2 light squares, you basically win. So bishop a6, but then I said no to this line because of rook b8, just taking up all of these squares. But I missed bishop c4 check. Bishop e6, and now takes, and a6. And here the rook will be having to be attached to a8 sooner or later. By the way, If the king decides to move here, that's a big mistake because now I have a6 and my pawn is rolling. The extra pawn that black won here is absolutely useless. I played e takes d5, knowing that I'm getting into trouble, and after a5, knight b4, and suddenly I'm back into trouble. My opponent is threatening to take and then go c2 and then maybe c1. Because this, let's say I do some stupid move, takes this, and suddenly like the threat bishop takes c2 is on the board. And this is winning for black. So I can't play anything here. I play bishop e4, getting out of this takes. But now this rook c4, extremely active move, hits my bishop. And I don't have time to escalate my pawn because of this rook takes c4 hitting my knight as well. So I go with knight d4 blocking. My best move here is a crazy move, bishop h7. And after the king attacks, back to d3. Takes, c2 is not, takes, attacking the rook, pardon. The rook goes back and now bishop d4 check picks up the pawn. Because the king's on g7. Like bishop h7 attracts the king to g7 because this works 3 moves later is insane to me, insane. So I missed it and I played knight d4 and now I'm in trouble. Black gains a small edge. This game is wild, I told you. I told you what you were coming into at the beginning of the video. Make sure to like and sub if this is your first video watching. Bishop f6, attacking my knight. And now I go a6, threatening a7, threatening a8. Bishop takes d4, and now I go a7. Because if I take here, rook takes, attacks my bishop, I'm completely losing here because, well, just black has time to just catch up to this pawn and win it eventually. So I sack a knight here to then regain it because after a7, I'm going to queen and you have to sack it back. And this is the key move. Check on the king while my bishop is on prise to save my bishop after that. And I'm down a pawn. I'm fighting for a draw in this endgame. It's really not likely to happen because this pawn is so weak on c2. Bishop e6, I was really expecting bishop f5. It just really helps black try to escalate this pawn and removes this bishop from, the pawn marching up the board. So bishop e6 played. I go bishop f2, like kind of in uncertainty. He goes back to f5. Now I go takes, and now I go king e2. Here I'm just meeting knight takes c2 with king d3, right? And there's no way you defend this. So I'm kind of virtually defending my pawn, a task that would be impossible without this king move. Rook check, king f3. Great move once again. Everything else pretty much loses. King here just lets the king free entry, and king here same. And bishop here loses. 2 pawns up in a rook endgame. Should be enough right there. So I go king f3. Check, king g3, another great move. Here, my mission is to completely block this pawn. If you decide to take now because the rook's defended, rook c7 picks up the pawn. So that's a very important line. Now back to c4 because I was coming in with this. And now I find a really nice move. Check, king must go back. Again, my king taking up these 2 squares, perfect. Bishop e3, attacking this pawn. If you take, I was ready to meet this with check, king move, and then bishop c1. Only move to still defend this rook. And now knight b4, and then I would just run my king and go for a draw. This is small edge for black, but if we put a very strong and deep engine, it's a draw. Yes. Depth 30 says it's a draw. So, my opponent defends the pawn with g4, and now this pawn is overextended. My rook is cutting this king, and also over that, I was planning this on this move and then takes knight here and then king takes g4 and eventually I would catch up to the pawn. All I would have to do is sack my bishop on the pawn on the promotion square and that's a draw. But I saw something even more concrete and drawish. Rook a4, pinning the knight to the rook, and after a king move I have bishop c5, attacking this knight and forcing the rook to take my bishop. And after I take this knight, now it's hard to defend this pawn. You eventually lose it. I don't think I can take here. Can I take here? Rook d2 I didn't like. No, I didn't like this. Well, this is probably still draw because my king comes in, like king f3, king e2, king d3. But I had something even more simpler, rook c4. And I win this crucial pawn before my opponent wins my pawn. The moment of grace. After rook here, now that I think of it, this is just a really easy draw. Check first, the king moves out and I take. But look, I just take this pawn, and even if I win this pawn, not to beat around the, not to say something outrageous, but if anybody's playing for winning chances, if I win this pawn outright, it's me. So rook g1, and then my opponent decides to repeat, and we agree to a draw after a tumultuous 5-hour game. I am now 5 games undefeated in this tournament, heading into round number 9. And let me tell you, next game I am playing against the world memory champion. I realized that at 5 a.m. before the round the next day that he was the world memory champion and that he had literally rehearsed 100 moves of Najdorf in 20 minutes for fun. This is who I'm playing up against tomorrow.